Hello listeners, this talk is in response to a question I received from Derek Crumplesnatch. His question was, what are your thoughts on the hysteria surrounding the supposed September happening, or the Shemitah? So thank you for your question, Derek Crumplesnatch, and I'd also like to add that that's a fantastic name. I'm not sure whether it's your real name or not. I'm fairly sure it's not your real name. But either way, that's a great name. Now, before I get into answering that question, I would like to explain or define a couple of the terms that were mentioned in the question. So the first one is September happening. Historically, there have been several stock market corrections or crashes that began in September. And so there is a certain amount of lore, as in L-O-R-E, or superstition, that has arisen about the month of September in financial circles. That said, I've also read that in terms of the number of such events, April is actually a worse month for these things than September. But nevertheless, September is regarded as some sort of bad or unlucky month. The next term I would like to define is Shemitah. I had never heard of this concept prior to Derek Crumplesnatch's question, so I looked it up, and it means release in Hebrew. It's the 7th year of an agricultural cycle, and there are all sorts of rules or restrictions, religious rules, that occur or are in place during Shemitah. So land is to be left fallow, and there are certain things you can do, but there are a whole lot of things you can't do. I'm not going to list all of those. You can go and look those up if you like. Also, debts, except those of foreigners, are to be remitted. And there is a general kind of welfare because the land has to be left open for others to harvest that land. And there are rules about that as well. And this concept of leaving the land open to harvest by others, it exists in many cultures, and it exists in the West too. I don't know if it predates Christianity, but there are certain Christian concepts as well, and those derive from the Old Testament, obviously. So they're related to Shemitah, I suppose. And the most well-known example, I suppose, is Ruth. And there's also a famous painting that was completed in 1857. It was called The Gleaners, and it was by Jean-François Millet. I think that's how you say his name. And it features 3 women, poor women, harvesting fallen grains from the ground in a field after that field has already been harvested. But nevertheless, these kinds of cultural practices exist in many places, and there are ways to offer welfare without it being just a pure handout. All right, so that's the Shemitah, basically. All right, now in terms of answering this question, the short answer, the too long didn't listen answer, is going to be I have absolutely no idea if there is going to be a September happening, and I have absolutely no idea about how I would know that and how I would know what would cause it either. Now, that's not going to be very interesting if I leave it there, so I'm going to go into some more depth as to why I think that. Before I do that, though, I would like to break Derek Crumplesnatch's question down into 3 sub-questions, because I think his question was quite dense. There were a lot of implied or suggested concepts or ideas at work there. So the first of those sub-questions is there going to be a big financial crisis? The second is, if so, will that begin in September of 2015? And it's currently September of 2015. And the third sub-question is, if there is going to be a big financial crisis, what will the cause of that be? So I'll address the first one. Is there going to be a big financial crisis? The short answer is yes, at some point. Now, of course, that's not very much of an answer. That's a bit like saying, is it going to rain, or am I going to die? Yes, at some point. Now, the yes part is not so much the interesting part. It's the at some point, and obviously that's a bit evasive. So the long answer is yes. Everywhere we look right now, there are potential problems. There are stock market bubbles in many countries currently. There are housing bubbles in many countries currently. Indeed, the two countries with which I am most familiar, Australia and Taiwan, both currently have quite large housing bubbles. Also, there are massive amounts of debt, so private debt, corporate debt, public debt, building up all over the place, all over the world. And obviously those debts are going to have to be addressed at some point. Also, governments are doing all sorts of funny things. So they're engaging in Keynesian policies, and I'm not a big fan of Keynesian policies, financial policies. But nevertheless, they are doing that. There are all sorts of manipulations going on there. And there are also all sorts of outright lies, pretty much, in terms of how they report everything from inflation to unemployment and all sorts of other economic indicators. So governments are engaged in all sorts of shenanigans there. Also, there are bad demographics in all of the world's major economies, pretty much. The developed West, developed Asia, and developing China. Basically, all of these countries have fertility rates that range from being bad to horrible. And that issue of bad fertility rates is going to cause all sorts of flow-on effects. So the dependency ratios are really getting quite bad now. And dependency ratios are basically the number of old people who are no longer working, how many of those people there are, and the ratio between those and those who are of working age. And essentially what is happening in the world, and has been happening for quite some time, is that the number of workers to each retiree has been diminishing. So in the past, there might have been 7 workers to every retiree, and in many places they're getting down to something like, I think in Taiwan it's 2 to 1 at the moment, if I remember correctly, which is crazy, obviously, because it means those workers, more and more of their taxes are just going to support old people. They're not going to anything else other than just supporting old people. And, of course, China is in an even worse situation than many other countries because they're going to be old before they're developed. At least Japan or the UK or New Zealand or any other country in the developed world, those countries have already developed. But China hasn't even got to that point. It's not going to be a rich country before it's an old country. And so these are going to cause big problems. There are all these unfunded liabilities around the world in terms of social security or pensions. And also the medical systems. Medical systems, if they're not already bankrupt, they're going to be very soon in pretty much every country. And all of those things are really just giant Ponzi schemes, because the way they work is that you have a few people using these things, drawing pensions or using large amounts of medical care and so on at the top. So they're sort of the apex of the pyramid, and then you have a big base of people supporting them. But what's happening is that base is shrinking, and in some places, at some point, they're actually going to flip, and you'll end up with an inverted pyramid. And so, of course, that's unsustainable. And the Ponzi scheme collapses at that point. And indeed, if I remember correctly, in the US, it's around the year 2030 for one, and I think 2033 for the other. One is Social Security and the other one is the medical system. They're basically going to run out of money within, say, 15 to 18 years. And there's a similar situation in many other countries also. So, yes, there is going to be a financial crisis. All of these problems are mounting, and they can't go on forever. They're unsustainable. Now, before I can really sort of say when that's going to happen, I need to look into this concept of will it begin in September of this year, because it will happen at some point, but specifically, will it begin in September, this month, essentially, of 2015? Well, as I've already mentioned, there have been other financial crises that have begun in other months, and supposedly April is actually the real danger zone. So to me, saying it's going to be September because September is a special month is a bit like cherry picking the data to fit the theory. And this, to me, sort of gets into the realm of Nostradamus. When I was a kid, they always had these television programs about what are they called? The predictions of Nostradamus. And they would always do some show about how Nostradamus had predicted the rise of Hitler or something, right? Now, what they didn't tell you is, and they're always sort of very vague in these things, you had to sort of suspend disbelief somewhat. They had to kind of bend things a little bit to make the prediction fit the actual event. But the other thing they didn't tell you is that, Nostradamus wrote, 2,000 predictions, and, 100 of them came vaguely true. Well, what about the other 1,900 or however many didn't come true? So it's a bit like that, or it's a bit like the Mayan calendar. Remember, the world was going to end in 2012, and they actually made a movie about it. Remember, some of you may be old enough to remember Y2K. Aeroplanes were going to fall out of the sky on the turn of the millennium. Didn't happen. Computers were going to all crash. Didn't happen. I met a woman. I was traveling in the US around that time. I met a woman in where was it? Tennessee. It was in Tennessee. And this woman and her friends were going to move to the hills in Arkansas, and they were buying all this water, bottled water, because they were predicting that there was going to be the Armageddon at the end of that year, and it didn't happen, of course. So all of this gets into the realm of soothsaying and astrology and tarot cards and all of that sort of stuff. And I'm not really a big fan of superstition and so on. So, look, really, I don't know. I'm not saying that there won't be a crisis in September. There could well be a crisis in September. I'm just saying, go and get me some sheep entrails and I'll read those and I'll tell you when the crisis is going to occur, So, all right, this brings me to the third question. What will the cause be when there is a crisis? Because there will be eventually. What will the cause be? Well, the cause could be that a feedback loop could be created. So if it does happen in September, or whenever it happens, these things tend to happen in a particular way. Some people start getting jittery, and then there's a slight downturn, and they take that as evidence that the big crash is here. And so they sell off. And then other people notice that, and they sell off. And there's basically a snowballing effect. It creates a feedback loop, essentially, where people who are nervous take something as the culmination of their prediction, or the eventuation of their prediction, and then it just keeps reinforcing, and then you do get a crisis at that point. But again, I'm not really sure what is intrinsic to September, other than the fact that there's this sort of previous data, set of previous data. But as I said, there are a whole lot of other data points that don't fit into this theory either. So I'm not really sure what there is that's intrinsic to September and how we could predict that. Because it's the prediction part that's the important part. I'm not quite sure how we could predict that. I think that if and when this happens, as tends to happen generally, it will happen very quickly, and if you think you're going to sort of time the market, you're really playing with fire. There's that Keynesian quote, and I'm not a fan of Keynes, but he does there's one quote that's very good from him, and that is that the market can remain irrational longer than you can stay solvent. So you may say, all right, it's going to happen this month, and there are costs involved in reacting to any situation. There are at least opportunity costs, if not other costs. And so just like that woman I met who was going to move to the hills of Arkansas with a whole lot of other people with some bottled water and so on, there were costs, opportunity costs, and the costs of buying those things and so on for those people. So these things can take a lot longer to happen than anyone would predict. I mean, the logical way to behave is if you really do believe that there is going to be something this September, then you'd have to act upon that. So short stocks, particular stocks or indices, buy precious metals, buy or build a bunker in the mountains and start prepping, or even in a sort of a less severe crisis, just hold cash. Those would be the logical things to do if you really believe or believed that September is when it's all going to come to a head. Now, I mentioned that quote by Keynes. People all around the world have predicted various crashes for quite a long time now. As I mentioned, both Australia and Taiwan have housing bubbles, and people have been predicting for the past decade or more that those housing bubbles are going to pop right now or tomorrow. They have to. Things can't keep going as they're going. They have to pop. And yet they've been making those predictions for a long time. Likewise, you can go on YouTube, and if you type in 2010 financial collapse, you can find a whole bunch of videos there by people saying, this is it, 2010, September 2010, or whenever, this is when it's going to happen. It's all going to happen this month. And of course it didn't. So then you type in financial collapse 2011, and you'll find a whole bunch of videos, sometimes by the same people, saying, all right, it didn't happen in 2010. Definitely 2011. Didn't happen. Type in 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, etc. And you'll find all the same people saying all the same things. Peter Schiff is sort of notorious for this. And look, I do have some sympathy for Peter Schiff because he did predict the financial crisis in 2008, as did a handful of other people. And he was ridiculed in the lead up to that for believing that was going to happen. And again, people are ridiculing him now, and he's saying, well, I was right before. Okay, but he literally releases a video every single day saying it's going to happen, right? Yeah, it's going to happen, but when, right? It's all about the when. It's all about timing is everything, you know. If you're a day too late, then it doesn't matter, right? But if you're a month too early or a year too early, then you incur a whole lot of costs, obviously, both opportunity costs and real costs. And further to this, there's a reason why they call shorting the Japanese bond market the widow maker. Likewise, precious metal bugs, and Peter Schiff is one of those guys. Precious metal bugs have been saying, gold $10,000 an ounce. They've been saying that for years. I get these newsletters in my email from various websites, and a couple of them are these sorts of gold and silver websites. They're basically talking their book, because they make their money by selling gold and silver, right? But every week I get one of these newsletters, and it's 6 different people all saying, gold $10,000 an ounce, world financial collapse imminent, and they've been saying that for years and years and years. And okay, there have been times when people have made money from gold or silver, yes, but if you look at a chart of the price of gold and silver, there was a big spike in the early 80s, and then pretty much for a good 20 years or so, through most of the 80s, all of the 90s, and even into the first decade of this century, gold and silver were pretty much flat. And then there was a big run-up to 2011, and then the prices have collapsed again. Not to their pre-run-up prices, but nevertheless, if you had bought in 2010, or well, not 2010, say 2011, if you had bought in 2011 or any time since, you would have experienced quite dramatic losses. Now you might say, well, it's going to happen eventually, and yet, as I said, there was a good 2 decades through most of the 80s and all of the 90s into the first decade of this century where the prices were flat, so basically people didn't have any return, but in the meantime inflation marched on. And so, these things are meant to be a hedge against inflation, and yet they weren't. Gold bugs, silver bugs, they've been predicting the collapse for a long time now, and it hasn't really worked out that well for them. Now, all of these people may eventually be right, but a broken clock is also correct twice each day. The point is not that they're correct. The point is that you need to be able to tell the time in the interim. You need to be able to live your life in the interim. And you may grow old and grey or even die before something happens, or you may lose a certain amount of time before certain things happen. So there are real costs because people don't live forever. So, if these guys have been making these predictions month after month after month for the past however many years, at what point do you say that if something happens, it's coincidence? I really can't say. I'm not saying that there won't be a collapse this September, but I'm not really sure how we can know if there will be one, and I'm not really sure how we can know why there would be one. Why then? Because all of the arguments seem to rest upon some sort of cosmological belief that September is special. Again, I just don't know why that would be. Now, there are some other possibilities. There could be various conspiracy theories. And I'm not sure if Derek Crumplesnatch was implying, by using the term Shemitah, that Jews were somehow planning something, that they were involved in a conspiracy. I know a lot of people on the alt-right have all sorts of conspiracy theories about Jews, and many things are not conspiracy theories about Jews, but there's all people... many people go a bridge too far, I think, or they make all sorts of predictions that may in fact be true, but about things which we have no way of actually knowing whether they're true or not. So, all right, let's just suspend disbelief for a moment and say, okay, there's a big Jewish conspiracy. The top 1,000 Jews in the world or something are plotting to crash financial markets and impoverish and enslave all of the Goyim this month. Okay, if that's true, how would we know? Because I tend to think that if you're reading about this kind of conspiracy on Poll, or you're reading about this on Yahoo Finance or something, some guy's blog that's readily accessible and available on the internet, it's probably not very much of a conspiracy. It's probably not a very good conspiracy, because the whole point of conspiracies is that they're secret. Only a few people know about them, and then they unhash their plan, and it's like, ha-ha, you were not suspecting this. Ha-ha, we've got you. If someone like me knows about this, then it's probably not a very good conspiracy. Now, of course, that could lead to all sorts of people saying, well, there's another layer. You need to peel back the second layer of the onion. And this is where things get into all sorts of realms of paranoia, and to which they'll say, well, just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean I'm wrong, but let me sort of peel back a couple of layers. So what if the conspiracy is simply to hide it in plain sight? what if, okay, not everyone's reading Poll, not everyone's reading Yahoo Finance or whatever. I mean, large numbers of people are, but okay, not everyone's doing that. So it's kind of in plain sight, but we know the truth. Again, I don't know how you can know that. From an epistemological standpoint, I can't say you're wrong if that's what you believe, but it seems unfalsifiable to me. And therefore, I'm not sure how you can say you're right unless it happens, but how do you know it's not coincidence? It seems very unfalsifiable to me. So, I don't know, it seems to get into paranoid territory very quickly. And then, another point along those lines is that, okay, so let's say that somehow you know, and you think, all right, there's going to be a financial collapse on the 30th of September, or I don't know, the 23rd of September or something, right? So you're going to get out a day before, you're going to time the market perfectly, you're going to get out on the 29th of September. What if this is like a big chess match and you're thinking, haha, I can think 6 moves ahead, but what if your opponent can think 7 moves ahead? And what if he says, I know that you know that I'm planning it for the 30th of September, so you're going to get out on the 29th of September. What if I actually get out on the 28th of September and crash the market on the 28th of September after I've got out? And you can get into this whole thing of, okay, so what if I know that he knows that I know that he knows that I know that he knows? And then, it's crazy, right? How can you actually know any of that? It's all games within a game. It's like you're playing poker and everyone's trying to bluff each other. Is he bluffing me? Does he actually have a full house, or is he just bluffing? Who knows? Really, who knows? And I think you end up driving yourself crazy. But then there's another layer you could peel back, and you could go in the opposite direction, and you could say, all right, so what if the conspiracy is to make you believe it's going to happen in September, and then it doesn't happen in September, and so everyone says, see, it didn't happen in September, you're crazy, and then you say, yeah, I guess I'm wrong. It didn't happen, so it's not going to happen in September. So what if they're really planning to sort of take the wind out of your sails or some other guy's sails to sort of discredit these people saying it's going to happen at this particular time? And then what if, just as you've sort of relaxed, then they pull the crash in November, not September, November. They've lulled you into a false sense of security all through September and October, and then bam, the 1st of November, they unleash financial Armageddon. But, what if they're going to do it in December instead of November? What if they're going to do it in January of next year or February of next year? Again, how can you know? How can you actually predict this except in hindsight? It seems completely unfalsifiable to me, except in hindsight, right? So, I don't know, really. I think you just get into severe paranoia once you go down that road. At the end of the day, I really don't know what's going to happen. I have no way of knowing what's going to happen. I think all you can do is do a fundamental analysis and say, all right, well, you think this situation's pretty bad. It doesn't make any sense. Everything's overvalued and so on and so forth. Something has to give at some point, and react accordingly. That's the best anyone can do. But again, as I've said, there are opportunity costs and there are real costs involved in doing so. I'll tell you what I'm doing. I'm in this for the long haul. Generally speaking, as I've mentioned before, a lot of my money is tied up in my businesses, and I'm basically saying, well, things will continue. People will still need to buy certain things, goods and services, and that's all I can do, because I don't know what else I'm going to do if I don't believe that to some extent. And I just have to try to be frugal and be careful and so on accordingly as best I can. And in terms of other investments, I'm into value investing, so I don't get into the whole hype of things always inflating in price. I look at the fundamentals and I say, all right, this particular stock is undervalued or overvalued. And so if it's undervalued and there's a margin of safety built in and so on, then my actual approach, because I don't need the money tomorrow, because I don't need it next week or next month or next year or in 5 years or whatever, my approach is, if it goes down, that actually represents buying opportunities. Because if I think it's a good buy, if I think it's a good company and it's currently undervalued, then if the price of it goes down even more, then it's even more undervalued, and that represents a really good buying opportunity. It's along the lines of that quote by Baron Rothschild: when there's blood in the streets, it's time to buy, even if the blood is your own. So that's the way I'm approaching it, because I'm not in a position to have myself set up in a fully stocked bunker in the mountains, armed to the teeth and all of the rest of it. I'm not in that position. I don't know if I'll ever really want to be fully in that position, but even if I wanted to be, I'm certainly not there yet. So, look, if there really is some sort of financial apocalypse, then I'm basically screwed like everyone else. There's not much I can do about that at this point. And even liquidating everything I have and buying gold or something right now, I don't think that would really save me, to be honest. That said, if you, and I'm talking about a general you here to anyone listening, if you really believe that something is coming in the remaining 11 days of this month or next month or whenever, then act upon it. Have the courage of your convictions and act upon it. So sell up, but be aware of the losses you may occur in doing so, or the opportunity costs, the lost returns, by holding cash or by buying precious metals or anything else, or short the market. But again, be aware that shorting is extremely risky because there's limited upside but potentially unlimited downside. So it's very asymmetric in a bad way. So, do those things if you really believe that something is coming. I'm not saying you should do those things, but if you really think something is coming, then back yourself. There's no point having an opinion if you're not actually going to follow it through. Go and buy or build a bunker, fortress, ranch, or what have you, and start prepping. Because really, if you haven't acquired yourself a little citadel by now, then you're running out of time. You've only got 11 days left. I'm not really sure you could acquire one in that time, but do so. What about precious metals? I'd like to mention precious metals briefly, because a lot of people really get into precious metals and think that precious metals are sort of the panacea to all of this. You'll see these guys saying gold $5,000 an ounce, gold $10,000 an ounce, or whatever. Maybe, but there are a number of things to consider about that. Firstly, where would you get sufficient quantities? Because you would need a fair amount of this, unless you think 1 ounce of gold is going to, you can buy an ounce of gold now for whatever it is. I think it's $11.80 or something like that. That you can buy an ounce of gold right now. $11.42.30. All right, but just over $1,100. That you're going to buy that, and then you'll be able to exchange that for a house or something. Unless it really goes to that point, and I don't think it would. You'd need to have a fair amount of gold or silver to ride this out. So you'd need to be able to acquire those, and those things are not necessarily easy to come by where you are in the quantities you want, and you have to pay premiums and so on. But then there's another question: how are you going to store your precious metals? Because certainly silver takes up a significant amount of space, because silver's not worth anywhere near as much as gold. Let me just look at the price for silver. Silver is just over $15, $15.24. So you need a lot of silver to each ounce of gold. So silver takes up a lot of space, actually, to have it in sufficient quantities. And of course, there are security issues. If you think you're going to have all this gold or silver, are you going to store that at your house? Who would know about it? Or what if a random person broke into your house tomorrow, and so on and so forth? Or, where else would you put it? People say they'll go and bury it in the forest or something, or in a lake. Again, what if someone discovers it? Or what if you want to store it at a depository? Well, in the advent of a crisis, would governments just allow people to go and collect their gold and silver from depositories, or would governments send soldiers to those depositories and tell the people who run them to freeze the transactions and not allow people to take delivery? So what are you going to do with gold if you have it, or silver if you have it? But even if you got through all of that, would you even be able to spend your precious metals? Again, would the government not simply pass emergency measures preventing people from trading in gold and silver? Because there'd be, you can imagine that could be conceived as being profiteering in some way. You might say, well, no, you've just been prudent, but other people would see it as profiteering. So the government would try to stop that from happening, and they would put laws in force, and they would also put incentives in place for other people to report others. So how would you spend your gold or silver? You might be able to spend some of it, but you would never know if the person you were about to trade with would call the police and report you. So I don't know. I don't know that the precious metals are really going to be a solution. Likewise, if you think you're going to have some sort of bunker or something in the mountains, real self-sufficiency is actually a very big thing. It's a very laborious thing. So most people, when they say they're going to be self-sufficient, they're going to prep and so on, they still need, at some point they would still need to interact with other people and trade with them and so on. And if people know that you have a bunker full of all of this stuff, would they just say, okay, you've been really clever, we haven't, we'll just go off and half of us will die now because we won't, we wouldn't steal what you have, or we wouldn't sort of put social pressure upon you to share some of that with us and so on. And the government wouldn't come along and try to take those things from people who had prepared, or hordes of marauding savages wouldn't come and take those things from you. And you might say, well, I'll have a bunch of guns and fend them off. Yeah, okay, what if there are 10 of them with guns and there's one of you with a gun? Who's going to win that fight and so on? So, again, even having some sort of getaway, you would need to have enough other people around you who were in a similar situation, who had also prepared and were of like mind for that to work. Likewise, if you were to flee to another country, would you be able to get into another country? Would that other country be okay, or would it have also experienced some sort of contagion and so on? So I'm not really sure that there is any foolproof way out of this. If there is a full-blown financial crisis, I don't think there's really going to be a real solution to that, because I think there you're getting into kind of Cormac McCarthy territory, where you'll have people eating each other, that kind of thing, right? If it's really that bad. If it's not that bad, then yes, you possibly can profit. But as I've said, timing the market, the market can remain irrational for longer than you can remain solvent, particularly if you're shorting the market. All right, so that's all a very long way of saying I actually have no idea, really, if there's going to be a crisis in September. I'm not sure how I could know that, because I don't buy into any sort of superstitious law surrounding September as being some sort of spooky month. If there's a conspiracy, a guy like me, some average dude, he's not going to find out about the conspiracy until it's already happened. I'm in this for the long haul. I'll try to react as well as I can when there is eventually a crisis. If it's a moderate crisis, then I'll probably be okay because I'll have some cash available and I'll buy low. But if it's full on zombies in the streets, well then we're all screwed pretty much. 99% of us are not getting out of that scenario without some sheer luck on our side. But if you really do think that something is coming, then act upon it. Otherwise, it's really just talk. All right, so that's basically it. Let me know what you think. Some of you may rage at me and think, I'm either in denial or maybe I'm actually part of the conspiracy. I don't know, but let me know what you think. That's sort of as much as I can really figure out, to be honest. I'm just some guy. So that's it. Thanks for listening.